Hey everyone, welcome back. Welcome. Hey, I just want to put something together real quick here because there's a Mormon gentleman. He's a good man, a decent man. I really like him. And we have kind of a tradition. We get together every once in a while and have lunch and talk about theology. And one of the things that has been really troubling to me is that he will hear all the evidence about the untruthfulness of the church. He will see the evidence of changing doctrines and of false doctrines and of one prophet throwing another prophet under the bus. I mean, there's almost hardly a dead prophet now that doesn't have tire tracks up his back. It's crazy. He sees all this. He sees it. And he sees the contradiction, and he sees the confusion, and he sees the change. And yet, when I ask him about it, why do you allow this? Why don't you act on this? Why don't you respond to this? Why don't you resolve this? He says, well, I'm comfortable in my relationship with Christ. And so I don't let any of the rest of that trouble me. I don't let any of that bother me. I don't think about those things. And that's nuts, because we are taught in Scripture that we must test everything. And yet he says, well, I'm comfortable. So I don't worry about these things. So in our last meeting together, this man asked me to provide evidence that the current prophet, Russell Nelson, had stood up in a general conference and talked about the wonder and the power and the glory, the absolute coolness of being in a meeting with the then current prophet, Thomas Monson, when God shined down from heaven, revealed to them with absolute clarity that the children of homosexual couples were not to be baptized. This caused quite a stir. In fact, it resulted in one of the biggest mass resignations from the church that we've ever seen. It did not go over well. And so shortly after he became prophet, which was just a year or two later, he stood up again and he spoke about the revelation that came down from God. This same God sent him a new revelation and said, that's a bad policy. So the Mormon God changed his mind. Again. Anyway, this gentleman asked me to provide him with proof that the current prophet had been on both sides of this issue. And I said I would present it, but I thought about it and I thought, man, no. Because if I give him absolute evidence, he will look at it and he will say, there's the evidence. I see it, but I don't worry about those things. So what good would it do? When I was in the Air Force, I was a flight engineer on the C-141. That's a large 4-engine transport aircraft. And the layout of the cockpit is that in the front left seat, that's where the pilot sits. The front right seat is the co-pilot. And on the right wall, behind the co-pilot, there's a huge panel of gauges and switches and dials. And that was my position. That's where I sat to run and operate the different systems. Now, a typical crew included 2 pilots and 2 flight engineers. So anyway, we were at one time on our way home from Yokota Air Force Base in Japan, headed back to McCord near Tacoma, Washington. That was our home base. Now, about halfway across the ocean, the airplane just suddenly shuddered and it groaned a little bit, and we immediately went to our panel trying to figure out what was going on, and indicator lights and the pressure gauge showed that we had no hydraulic pressure. Now, we did everything we could to try to identify where it was leaking, identify what system was leaking, to see if we could isolate it so that we could repressurize the remaining systems, and we had no luck at all. We literally tried and pressurized the system, and that fluid ran out, and we tried again and pressurized, and that fluid ran out until we had no more hydraulic fluid left, and we had zero hydraulic pressure. Now, there's a problem when you don't have hydraulic pressure, especially on an aircraft that big. You see, our flight controls, our ailerons, our rudder, our elevator, they are all manipulated by hydraulic pressure. So the ailerons allow the plane to roll. The rudder allows us to yaw left and right, and the elevator allows us to climb or descend. So we had a problem in that we really didn't have much in the way of controls now. These control surfaces were pretty much dead. Now, there's another problem as well. You need hydraulic pressure to lower the flaps. And when you lower the flaps, it effectively enlarges the area of the wing. It makes the wing bigger. It gives the wing more lift. And that extra lift allows us to approach our landing at a slower speed. But if you can't get the flaps down, it means you're going to be landing at a very high rate of speed. And that's not good. And it's especially not good when you realize that the spoilers, the flaps, that come up on the surface of the wing that are designed to pop up and create extra resistance to help slow the airplane. We couldn't deploy the spoilers. And also the reverse thrust. Now, if you've been on a commercial airliner, you know that they land and then there's kind of a and you kind of tip forward in your seat. Those are thrust reversers. They are also deployed by hydraulic pressure. And those are important to slow the aircraft down. Now, the other thing is the brakes. The brakes are hydraulically actuated. Without hydraulic pressure, you cannot apply the brakes. And if you can't apply the brakes, how will you stop? See, these were the problems we had. As soon as we identified the problem and realized what we were against, the pilots went to their manuals. You see, they had a different set of manuals. They had to figure out everything they needed to know to maintain control of an aircraft when it had no hydraulic pressure. And so they had their set of challenges. Now we, the two engineers, we went to the systems manuals, and we're starting to look at what can we do? You see, what can we give these pilots? Is there anything we can give them to help them do their job? Well, we couldn't give them much. In fact, in the end, all we could do is we had an emergency accumulator. It's just a tank, a pressurized tank, and we were able to store a small amount of hydraulic pressure in there at 3,000 psi, and that was all we had. We couldn't use it on the flight controls because then it would run out of the airplane and it would be gone. So we saved that because the manual said that that's enough hydraulic pressure to apply the brakes 3 times. And so of all the things that the pilots really needed in order to land the plane, the only thing we could give them was a few applications of the brakes. So we did our job the best we could. As we got closer, we contacted ground control, and they set us up on a very, very long final so that we had lots of time to get the airplane on the glide path, get the airplane lined out, flying in a straight line, get everything in order. And so we did that. Ground control did their part. They contacted the emergency services. And so the fire trucks and other emergency crew were out there. Medical experts were out there. We had everything we needed. Everything that could be put into place was put into place for us. And so as it turned out, we came in at a high rate of speed. We landed. The pilots got on the brakes. I don't think they trusted that they could actually release and apply again. You see, you're supposed to do that to keep the brakes from heating up and catching fire, but I think once the pilot had positive braking, he just stayed there and, well, if it gets hot, it gets hot. The good news is we were able to get it shut down, and we all got to go home that night. But what if instead of doing all the things that we did, what if we had said, oh, well, I see the problem, but our crew seats are comfortable. They're kind of big captain's chairs, reclining, very well padded. They're really pretty comfortable. We're comfortable. We're not going to worry about those things. We're not going to worry about those things. If we had done that, I think that our approach and our landing would have been a very, very different situation. Now let's liken it to my friend who says, I'm not going to worry about those things. Because you see, if worst had come to worst, if we couldn't have got the thing stopped and we ran out of runway, we may have ended up in a fireball. But that fireball would be long out by now. It wouldn't have lasted very long. But if we land on our last day, the last day of life, we land not worrying about everything that God says is important, that's worthy of our attention. If we land that way, we end up in that great eternal fireball, the lake of fire that burns forever and ever. And even that lake of fire that the Book of Mormon, 3 Nephi 27 says, when you're cast into that lake, you can never return. That's a fireball that never goes out. That's a fireball, and the people that land their life that way, so uncaring, so unworried about those things that God says worry about, he ends up in that lake of fire, and that is where he suffers eternally. So, I'm not going to send my friend the evidence that the current Mormon prophet changed his mind because the current Mormon God changed his mind. No, I'm going to point him to this webcast and ask him, why are you taking such a huge chance when all the evidence, when all indicators, when warning lights are going off, when everything God has said to you tells you to take action, to plan, to prepare, to be prepared? When you have all of this, why are you sitting back and saying, I don't worry about those things? And now to the Mormon bishops. This is not a rare opinion of the Mormon people. In fact, I see it all the time. I'm always faced with Mormons who just go, it doesn't matter. I see it in Mormon leadership. I see it in bishops and high councilmen and high priests and in stake presidents. I see them setting eternal things aside just because worrying about them is uncomfortable. So bishops, here's my question to you. What is worth worrying about? Hey, I'm Lance Earl. I'll see you soon, and hey, safe landings.